positions.
The relationship between the three branches of the federal government, the Presidency, the Congress, and the courts, has been marked by periodic dissensions, by fears founded or unfounded, that one branch is trying to encroach upon the authority of another. It is out of these clashes that their powers have evolved and continue to evolve. A president confronted by an opposition Congress can often be stymied in the enactment of his legislative programs. President Roosevelt, in his first administration, however, had a Congress apparently eager to do his bidding. As a result, numerous programs were passed, and Congress got a thank you from the president.
In the many methods of attack with which we met those problems, you and I, by mutual understanding and by determination to cooperate, helped to make democracy succeed by refusing to permit unnecessary disagreement to arise between our two branches of our government. I look forward to a continuance of that cooperation in the next 4 years. I look forward also to the continuance of the basis of that cooperation, a mutual respect for each other's proper sphere of functioning in a democracy which is working well, and a common sense realization of the need for play in the joints of the machine.
Republican President Eisenhower had a more difficult time securing the passage of legislation. He was thwarted by an opposition Congress.
If you had a Congress like that of Mr. Roosevelt in the early years of his administrations, Congress was quite ready to go along with everything he wanted to do. The country was in an emergency, and they followed along. The first 100 days of his administration, almost fabulous in the amount of legislation was brought about. But even in the first 2 years of my administration, for example, we came into power, the Republicans did, for the first time in 20 years. There was not a single senator, Republican senator, in the Senate when I came in there who had ever served as a Republican president. Now, as a result, they were raised in this tradition of antagonism between the executive and the legislature. And it was very, very difficult for Republican senators at first to remember that their job was now to cooperate with the president and he with them. On the contrary, they felt that they had to cut him down at first. It was instinctive. And indeed, the only way I could get anything constructive done in the last 6 years of my 2 terms was to get some kind of democratic help, or otherwise I couldn't pass anything.
Kennedy, too, commented on relations between President and Congress.
Franklin Roosevelt was elected by the largest majority in history in 1936, and he got his worst defeat a few months afterwards in the Supreme Court bill. So that they are 2 separate offices and 2 separate powers, the Congress and the Presidency. There's bound to be conflict, but they must cooperate to the degree that's possible. But that's why no president's program is ever put in. The only time a president's program is put in quickly and easily is when the program is insignificant. But if it's significant and affects important interests and is controversial, therefore, then there's a fight, and then the president is never wholly successful.
Harry Truman's relations with Congress, often, in a word, feisty.
The president doesn't have a fight or two with Congress is not considered a very strong man. It's necessary, and it's all right. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a personal matter. It's a matter of the Congress always trying to infringe the presidential rights. And a good, strong president, the Congress will accuse him of trying to infringe the congressional rights. And in each case, there's always some good accomplished, because the final result will be in the interest of the people. And the fact that we have that division of powers makes it much more safe for the people.
According to President Kennedy, the legislative process can also be an obstacle to the safe passage of presidential programs.
The Constitution and the development of the Congress all give advantage to delay. It's very easy to defeat a bill in the Congress. It's much more difficult to pass one. To go through a committee, say the Ways and Means Committee of the House, a subcommittee and get a majority vote, full committee, get a majority vote, go to the Rules Committee and get a rule, go to the floor of the House and get a majority, start over again in the Senate, subcommittee and full committee, And in the Senate, there is unlimited debate, so you can never bring a matter to a vote if there's enough determination on the part of the opponents, even if they're a minority, to go through the Senate with the bill, and then unanimously get a conference between the House and Senate to adjust the bill, or if one member objects, to have it go back through the Rules Committee, back through the Congress, and have this done on a controversial piece of legislation where powerful groups are opposing it. That's an extremely difficult task.
Because of his power and prominence, the president comes under constant and often harsh scrutiny by the nation's journalists. Following are three views on the relations between the president and the news media.
Oh, well, if he's got a thin skin, he's got no business being in the presidency. He must understand his own ideas of what's right and wrong, act on those ideas, and if the newspapers and the means of communication don't like what he does, let them say what they want to say. And then if he's in the same disposition I am, he'll get up and tell them where they're wrong, and never let them browbeat him.
It's never pleasant to be reading things frequently that are not agreeable news, but I would say that it's an invaluable arm of the presidency as a check, really, on what's going on in administration. And more things come to my attention that cause me either concern or give me information, even though we never like it, and even though we don't, even though we wish they didn't write it, and even though we disapprove, there isn't any doubt that we couldn't do the job at all in a free society without a very, very active press.
I do not believe that network commentators or newspaper reporters, as distinguished from editorial writers, who of course have a right to every bias and should express such bias, are above criticism. The criticism, and they shouldn't be sensitive about it. Now, when you go, however, to the question of subpoenaing the notes of reporters, when you go to the question of government action, which requires the revealing of sources, then I take a very jaundiced view of that kind of action. I believe, however, that each of us as a public figure has a right to indicate when we think the news coverage has been fair or unfair.
One of the singular and enduring features of America's constitutional democracy has been the orderly transferal of power. 36 different and diverse men have held the reins of power, and each has been like a temporary tenant who moves on when his lease runs out. It has been a hallmark of our system. Lyndon Johnson, who was abruptly thrust into the presidency upon the assassination of John Kennedy, recalls his efforts to assure the nation and the world that the torch had been passed, that the republic endured.
I thought it quite important that I have the cooperation and assistance of the former presidents, President Hoover, President Truman, President Eisenhower. I not only had their assistance and cooperation, I had their enthusiastic help. President Eisenhower got in his car and drove down from Gettysburg and sat in my office, borrowed a yellow notepad and a pencil, and sat there for a good while and wrote out his views, his suggestions to a new president. He said the first man I'd call to Washington was Robert Anderson. He said the second thing I'd do, I'd work out arrangements with the leadership, have a joint session of the Congress. He said the next thing I'd do is say to the Congress, we want to take up President Kennedy's program. Start with his tax program. And so with that memorandum as a basis, with some of the suggestions I received from President Truman, I tried to pull in all these groups. And I thought that it was a rather formidable bulldozer by the time we got them in and got them in agreement to move forward.
By constitutional amendment, the 22nd, which was proposed in 1947 and ratified in 1951, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Previously, there was no restriction on the number of four-year terms. Franklin Roosevelt, for example, was elected to 4 terms. Harry Truman was excluded from this new limitation, but he didn't think the amendment was a good idea anyway.